The first rule of surviving a dangerous man is simple. Never let him see how afraid you are. And the night I kissed Adrian Romano, I broke that rule before I even knew his name. It started with the rain. Cold spring rain. The kind that turns Manhattan sidewalks into mirrors of streetlights and taxi headlights. I remember checking my phone as I stepped out of the late shift at the diner on 8th Avenue. 11:42 p.m. My feet ached after 10 hours on them, and the only thing on my mind was getting back to my tiny Queens apartment and collapsing on the couch. That was before I heard the voices. They weren't loud. In fact, they were quiet enough that most people would have walked right past the alley beside the building without noticing anything strange. But something in the tone made my stomach tighten. Low voices. Controlled. The kind of voices that don't belong in ordinary conversations. I slowed down without meaning to, my sneakers splashing lightly through a shallow puddle. That was my first mistake. The second was looking toward the alley. I didn't see much. Just silhouettes under a dim security light, long coats, expensive cars idling along the curb. But the air felt wrong. Heavy. Like stepping into a room halfway through a conversation you weren't supposed to hear. My instincts told me to keep walking. I tried to. I really did. But a sudden movement behind me made my pulse spike. Footsteps. Not running. Just deliberate, steady footsteps following the same direction I was going. My heart started pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I turned the corner onto the next street, pretending I hadn't noticed anything. But the reflection in a storefront window told me I wasn't alone. Two men had stepped out of the alley. They weren't close yet, maybe 30 feet behind me, but they were definitely walking the same way I was. I told myself it was nothing. New York at night was full of strangers heading in the same direction. Still, my pace quickened. The rain picked up, tapping faster against the pavement, turning the streetlights into hazy halos of gold. Then a black SUV rolled slowly to the curb beside me. The window lowered halfway. I didn't even look at the driver at first. I just kept walking, clutching my bag strap. Tighter. But something about the silence inside that vehicle pulled my eyes toward it. A man sat in the back seat. Early 30s, maybe. Dark hair swept back, sharp features illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard lights. His suit looked like it belonged in a boardroom, not parked beside a soaked waitress on a quiet Manhattan street. Our eyes met for half a second. Calm. Observant. The kind of gaze that measures people without asking permission. And that's when the footsteps behind me suddenly got closer. Panic hit me all at once, fast and electric. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I yanked the SUV door open, slid into the back seat beside the stranger, grabbed the front of his jacket with shaking hands, and kissed him like my life depended on it. For a moment, the world stopped. The rain outside, the footsteps behind me, the entire city seemed to hold its breath. Then the man slowly pulled back just enough to look at me. His voice was calm, almost curious. "You realize," he said quietly, "you just kissed Adrian Romano." And something in the way the driver stiffened told me I had just made the most dangerous mistake of my life. I realized two things at the exact same time. First, the man sitting beside me had not moved even an inch during the kiss. Second, the footsteps behind me had stopped completely. The rain kept tapping softly against the roof of the SUV, steady and patient, like the city itself was waiting to see what would happen next. I slowly pulled back, my hands still gripping the front of his jacket. Up close, I noticed details I had missed before. The faint scent of expensive cologne, the sharp line of his jaw, the calm expression of someone who had never rushed a decision in his life. Adrian Romano watched me the way people study a puzzle they already know the answer to. Not angry, not surprised, just curious. I swallowed hard and turned my head toward the window. The two men who had been following me were standing on the sidewalk beside the car. The rain had soaked their jackets, but neither of them seemed to care. One of them leaned slightly toward the open door, looking past me at the man in the seat. Something in his posture changed immediately, like a switch had been flipped. Respect. Or maybe caution. It was difficult to tell the difference from where I sat. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then the driver in the front seat cleared his throat softly. The small sound felt loud inside the quiet vehicle. Adrian Romano still had not taken his eyes off me. "You opened my car door," he said calmly. "You climbed inside without permission." His voice was low and controlled, the kind of voice that did not need volume to hold authority. I nodded slowly, suddenly aware of how ridiculous my situation looked. A soaked waitress in a wrinkled diner uniform sitting beside a man whose suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. And then, he continued, you kissed me. My face burned with embarrassment. I am sorry, I said quickly. I just needed them to think I knew you. For the first time, Adrian shifted his gaze toward the sidewalk. The two men outside stood very still, their earlier confidence completely gone. The taller one raised both hands slightly, not in surrender, but in explanation. We did not realize, he said carefully. Adrian did not respond. He simply looked at them for a moment, expression unreadable. Whatever message passed between them required no words. The two men stepped back from the car almost immediately. One of them nodded once before both turned and walked down the wet sidewalk, disappearing into the glow of a distant streetlight. I let out a breath I had not realized I had been holding. My heart was still racing, but the immediate danger felt like it had drifted away with the rain. Thank you, I said quietly. Adrian turned back toward me. You think I helped you? It was not a question. I blinked. Did you not? For a moment he did not answer. Then his lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile. You made a very interesting choice tonight. I shifted uncomfortably in the leather seat. Look, I really appreciate it, but I should probably go. I reached for the door handle. The lock clicked before my hand even touched it. I froze. Adrian had not raised his voice. He had not moved quickly, but somehow the air inside the car felt different now, heavier than before. You kissed a stranger to stay safe, he said quietly. That was clever. His eyes met mine again, steady and unreadable. But now I want to know why you were running. I did not answer him right away because the truth sounded ridiculous even inside my own head. The rain continued to fall outside the SUV, sliding down the tinted windows in long silver lines that blurred the city lights into soft halos. Somewhere down the street a taxi horn echoed, distant and ordinary, like the rest of New York had no idea that my entire night had just taken a strange turn inside this quiet car. Adrian Romano waited without rushing me. That was the unsettling part. Most people filled silence with questions or impatience. He did neither. He simply watched, his dark eyes steady, as if he had all the time in the world. I shifted slightly in the seat and tried the door handle again out of instinct. It remained locked. The soft click from earlier still echoed in my mind. My pulse picked up again. I was not running from anything serious, I said finally. The words sounded weak even to me. Adrian raised one eyebrow, just slightly. It was a small reaction, but it carried more disbelief than a dozen spoken doubts. 2 grown men followed you down a Manhattan street in the rain, he said calmly. You jumped into a stranger's car and kissed him to create a distraction. His voice stayed level, thoughtful. That does not sound like nothing. I exhaled slowly and rubbed my hands together to warm them. My uniform sleeves were still damp from the rain, and the cold fabric clung to my arms. I work late shifts, I said. Sometimes people get the wrong idea. Adrian glanced briefly toward the windshield where the driver sat perfectly still, hands resting on the steering wheel, pretending not to listen. Then Adrian looked back at me. You are a terrible liar. The bluntness caught me off guard. I let out a nervous laugh before I could stop myself. I am not lying. You are. His tone remained calm, almost patient. But you are also shaking. I looked down and realized he was right. My hands trembled slightly in my lap. I quickly folded them together to hide it. Adrian noticed anyway. Of course he did. He seemed like the kind of man who noticed everything. What is your name? He asked. The question came so smoothly it took me a second to respond. Emily, I said. Emily Carter. Adrian repeated it slowly, like he was committing it to memory. Emily Carter. Hearing my name in his voice felt strangely personal for someone I had known less than 5 minutes. I cleared my throat. Now that the situation is over, I really should go. I gestured lightly toward the door. Thank you for the help. Really, but I think I have already caused you enough trouble tonight. Adrian studied me for another long moment. The quiet stretched again, thick and uncomfortable. Then he leaned back slightly in the leather seat, his posture relaxed in a way that made the space feel even smaller. Emily, he said calmly, do you know what most people do when they are afraid? I shook my head slowly. They run away. His gaze held mine. You ran toward me. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Adrian glanced toward the driver. Drive, he said simply. The engine started immediately. The car pulled away from the curb with smooth precision, tires gliding over the wet pavement. My stomach dropped. "Wait," I said quickly. "Where are we going?" Adrian turned his head slightly toward me again. The faint city lights reflected in his eyes as he answered in the same calm voice. "Somewhere dry." Then, after a brief pause, he added quietly, "And somewhere we can finish this conversation." I did not realize how far we had driven until the city outside the window began to change. The familiar noise of late-night traffic faded behind us, replaced by quieter streets lined with tall glass buildings that reflected the rain like polished mirrors. The SUV moved smoothly through the wet Manhattan roads, every turn controlled and deliberate, as if the driver already knew exactly where he was going without needing directions. I sat very still in the back seat, trying to slow my breathing. My mind kept repeating the same thought over and over. I had just kissed a man whose name people seemed to recognize instantly, and now I was riding through the city in his car at nearly midnight. The realization made my stomach twist with nervous energy. Adrian Romano seemed completely unaffected by any of it. He sat beside me with the same calm posture as before, one hand resting loosely against the armrest while the passing streetlights moved across his face in quiet. Flashes of gold and shadow. Every few seconds his eyes drifted toward me again, thoughtful and observant, as if he was studying a book he had not finished reading yet. After several minutes of silence, I finally spoke. "You can let me out anywhere," I said carefully. "A subway station would be fine." Adrian did not respond right away. Instead, he looked out the window for a moment, watching the rain streak across the glass. "It is almost midnight," he said eventually. "The subway platforms will be empty." I shrugged lightly, pretending it did not bother me. "I take the train late all the time." Adrian turned his head slowly. "I do not doubt that." His tone remained neutral, but there was something else underneath it, something measured and deliberate. "But tonight is different." The way he said it sent a quiet chill down my spine. I shifted slightly in my seat and crossed my arms to warm myself. The damp fabric of my uniform had begun to dry, but the air conditioning inside the SUV made the temperature feel colder than it should have. Adrian noticed immediately. Without saying anything, he reached toward the small control panel beside him and adjusted the climate settings. Warm air began flowing gently through the vents. The simple gesture caught me off guard. I had expected arrogance or impatience from someone like him. Instead, there was only quiet attention. The car slowed as it approached a red light. Through the windshield, I could see the reflection of a tall residential tower rising above the street, its upper floors glowing softly through the rain. The SUV turned smoothly into the private driveway beneath the building's covered entrance. A uniformed doorman stepped forward the moment the vehicle stopped, already opening a large glass door that led into a marble lobby. My heart skipped. "This is not a subway station," I said. Adrian almost smiled. "No." The driver stepped out first and opened my door before I could react. Cool night air rushed inside the car, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement and city lights. I hesitated for a moment, my hand still resting on the seat beside me. Adrian stepped out onto the sidewalk and turned back toward me, rain falling lightly against the shoulders of his dark coat. "Emily," he said calmly, "you asked where we were going." He extended his hand slightly, not forcing the gesture, simply offering it. His voice remained steady. "Now you have your answer." I hesitated in the doorway of the car because everything about the building in front of me looked like it belonged in a different life than mine. The glass entrance stretched nearly 20 feet high, framed by polished steel and soft golden lighting that reflected off the rain-soaked pavement. Inside, the marble lobby gleamed so clean it looked almost unreal. I glanced down at myself. My diner uniform was wrinkled from the long shift, the edges still damp from the rain, and my sneakers left faint wet marks on the sidewalk. I felt completely out of place. Adrian Romano stood beside the open car door with the calm patience of someone who had watched people hesitate before. The doorman waited silently near the entrance, holding the glass door open while the warm light from inside spilled onto the street. I looked back at Adrian. "I really should go home," I said carefully. "My apartment is in Queens, and it is already late." Adrian studied me for a moment, then glanced briefly toward the quiet street behind us. The rain had softened to a light drizzle, turning the city into a blur of distant headlights and glowing windows. "You can leave whenever you want," he said calmly. "But right now you are cold, tired, and still shaking." I opened my mouth to argue, but he was not wrong. My fingers had not fully stopped trembling since the moment I jumped into his car. Adrian gestured toward the lobby with a small motion of his hand. "Come inside for a few minutes," he continued. "You can warm up and then decide." His tone was steady, not demanding, just certain. That was the unsettling thing about him. He never sounded like he was forcing anything, yet the situation always seemed to move exactly where he intended. I looked at the building again. Warm light, quiet marble floors, a place where the rain and the cold could not reach. After a moment, I stepped out of the car. The doorman closed the door behind me as Adrian walked beside me toward the entrance. The lobby was even more impressive up close. The ceiling rose several stories above us, lined with soft recessed lights that reflected across polished stone floors. A quiet fountain murmured in the center of the room, its water glowing under hidden lighting. The entire space felt calm and controlled, like the chaos of the city outside had been carefully filtered away. I tried not to stare at everything as we crossed the lobby, but it was difficult. Adrian walked with the relaxed confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. A security guard near the front desk nodded respectfully as we passed. No questions, no surprise, just recognition. We stopped in front of a private elevator at the far end of the lobby. Adrian pressed a small metal panel beside the door. The elevator opened immediately with a soft chime. Inside, the walls were lined with dark wood and brushed steel that reflected the warm lighting above us. Adrian stepped in first, then turned slightly as I followed. The doors closed quietly behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The elevator began to rise smoothly, the gentle motion almost silent. I folded my arms again, partly from the lingering chill and partly from nerves. "This building is yours," I said slowly, not quite a question. Adrian leaned lightly against the wall beside the control panel. "A few floors," he replied. I stared at the numbers above the door as they climbed higher. 20, 25, 30. My stomach tightened again. I had never been anywhere like this before. The elevator slowed and stopped with a quiet tone. The door slid open to reveal a hallway lit with soft amber lighting and wide windows overlooking the rain-covered city. Adrian stepped forward and glanced back at me. "Welcome upstairs, Emily," he said calmly. "Now we can finally talk without the rain following us." I stepped out of the elevator slowly because the hallway outside looked even quieter than the lobby below. Thick carpets softened every step, and the soft amber lights along the walls made the entire floor feel calm and private, like the rest of Manhattan had been left far behind somewhere beneath the building. Through the tall windows at the end of the hall, I could see the city stretching out in every direction, thousands of lights glowing through the rain like scattered stars. For a moment, I forgot why I was here. The view alone felt unreal to someone who spent most nights serving coffee and pancakes under fluorescent diner lights. Adrian walked ahead of me with the same steady confidence as before, stopping at a dark wooden door near the corner of the hallway. He tapped a small code into a panel beside the frame, and the lock released with a soft click. The door opened into a wide apartment filled with warm lighting and quiet music playing somewhere in the background. I stepped inside carefully, unsure where to look first. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city skyline. A long leather sofa faced a modern fireplace that flickered with soft, orange light. Everything in the room looked precise and intentional, from the polished wood floors to the glass shelves lined with neatly arranged books. It did not feel like a place someone simply lived. It felt like a place someone controlled. Adrian closed the door behind us and walked toward a small bar near the windows. "Sit," he said calmly, gesturing toward the sofa. I hesitated for a moment before lowering myself onto the edge of the cushion. The warmth from the fireplace slowly reached my still damp clothes, and I felt my shoulders relax slightly for the first time all night. Adrian poured a glass of water and set it on the table in front of me. "You should drink something," he said. I wrapped my fingers around the cool glass and took a slow sip. My throat felt dry from the rain and the nerves that had been building since the alley. Adrian leaned lightly against the edge of the bar, watching me again with that same thoughtful expression. "Emily Carter," he said slowly, as if testing the sound of my name again. "Waitress working late hours in Manhattan." I frowned slightly. "How do you know where I work?" Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the windows where the rain continued sliding down the glass in thin silver lines. "You mentioned a diner," he said eventually, "and your uniform made it obvious." I looked down at my clothes again and felt a small wave of embarrassment. Grease stains from the kitchen shift were still visible on the sleeve. Adrian pushed away from the bar and walked closer, stopping several feet away so the distance between us still felt respectful. "Now," he said calmly. We returned to my original question. I tightened my grip on the glass. "Which one?" Adrian's eyes met mine again, steady and patient. "Why you?" "We're running." The room fell quiet except for the faint sound of rain against the windows and the low crackle from the fireplace. I stared into the water for a moment, gathering my thoughts. The truth sounded strange even inside my own head. Finally, I looked up again. "I heard something earlier tonight," I said slowly. Adrian did not move. "In the alley behind the diner." I paused. Something I do not think I was supposed to hear. Adrian studied my face carefully, and for the first time since I met him, the calm curiosity in his expression shifted into something sharper. "Tell me exactly what you heard." I held the glass of water with both hands because it gave me something to focus on besides Adrian Romano's eyes. The warmth of the apartment had finally reached my bones, but the memory of the alley behind the diner still made my stomach tighten. The rain continued tapping softly against the tall windows, and the distant lights of Manhattan stretched across the dark sky like a glowing map of the city. For a moment I considered telling him nothing. It would have been the safest choice. Finish the water, thank him for letting me warm up, and leave before I became part of a situation I did not understand. But the look in his eyes told me he already knew there was more to the story. Adrian did not pressure me. He simply waited. "The alley behind the diner is narrow," I began slowly. "Most people never go back there unless they're taking out trash or leaving through the kitchen door." Adrian remained still, listening carefully. I continued, choosing each word carefully. "I finished my shift around 11:30. The rain had already started, so most customers had left early. I went outside through the back door to get some air before heading home." I paused and stared into the fireplace for a second, remembering the moment. That is when I heard them talking. Adrian's voice remained quiet. "How many people?" "2," I answered. "Maybe 3. It was hard to tell because they were standing deeper in the alley near a parked car. I took another sip of water before continuing. "At first I thought it was just customers from the bar next door. People sometimes cut through the alley when it rains." Adrian nodded slightly, encouraging me to go on. "But the way they were speaking felt different," I said. "They were not laughing or arguing. They were discussing something very specific. Like a meeting." Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly. "What kind of meeting?" I hesitated again. The memory still felt strange. "They were talking about a delivery," I said slowly. "One of them mentioned a location near the docks on the East River. Another one kept repeating the time. Midnight." Adrian's expression did not change, but the quiet intensity in the room shifted almost immediately. I noticed the difference even before he spoke. "Go on," he said calmly. "They mentioned a name," I continued. I did not recognize it at first, but one of them sounded nervous when he said it, like he was worried about making a mistake. Adrian's eyes did not leave mine. "What name?" I took a breath before answering. "Romano." The room fell silent again. The rain outside seemed louder now, sliding against the glass in steady lines. For a moment Adrian did not react at all. Then he slowly straightened from where he had been leaning near the bar. "And after you heard this," he asked quietly, "what happened next?" I exhaled slowly. One of them stepped closer to the diner door. I think he realized someone might be nearby. My hands tightened around the glass. That is when I panicked. Adrian waited. I slipped out the back exit and tried to leave through the side street. I finished. But they must have followed me. I looked up at him again. "And that is when I saw your car." Adrian Romano studied me in silence for several seconds. Then he spoke in the same calm voice as before. "Emily," he said slowly, "you just overheard the wrong conversation on the wrong night." The way Adrian Romano said those words made the air in the apartment feel heavier, like the quiet room suddenly held more meaning than before. I sat very still on the sofa, the glass of water resting between my hands, while the rain outside traced slow lines down the enormous windows. Somewhere far below us the city continued moving, taxis passing, people walking under umbrellas, unaware that a simple conversation in a warm apartment had just turned into something much more complicated. Adrian stepped closer to the windows and looked out over the skyline for a moment, his reflection faint in the glass. The firelight from behind us flickered across his suit jacket, giving the room a calm glow that felt strangely comforting compared to the cold alley where this night had started. I watched him carefully, trying to read his reaction, but his expression remained controlled, thoughtful, almost calculating. "I did not mean to hear anything," I said quietly. "I was just leaving work." Adrian nodded once without turning around. "I believe you." The way he said it surprised me. There was no suspicion in his voice, only a simple acknowledgement of fact. After a few seconds, he faced me again. "The problem," he continued calmly, "is not whether you meant to hear it." I felt my stomach tighten slightly. "Then what is the problem?" Adrian walked back toward the sofa, stopping a few feet away, just like before. The distance between us remained careful and respectful, but his presence still filled the room. "The problem is that the men in that alley will assume you understood more than you actually did." I stared at him for a moment, but I did not understand anything. I only heard a name. Adrian tilted his head slightly, and that name was mine. The statement was simple, but it landed with quiet weight. I lowered my eyes toward the glass in my hands again. "I did not even realize it at first," I admitted. Adrian watched me closely. "Yet they saw you leave." I nodded slowly. "Yes." The room went silent again, except for the fire crackling softly behind us. After a moment, Adrian walked to a small table beside the sofa and picked up his phone. He did not speak into it right away. Instead, he looked at the screen for several seconds, as if considering something carefully. Then he set the phone back down without making a call. I noticed the decision immediately. "You are not going to contact anyone about it?" I asked. Adrian looked back at me with a faint expression that was almost a smile. "Not yet." I frowned slightly. "Why not?" Adrian rested one hand lightly on the back of the chair across from me and answered in the same calm voice he had used all night. "Because first I need to understand something." I waited. Adrian's eyes held mine again, steady and focused. "You had several choices tonight," he said slowly. "You could have hidden. You could have run in the opposite direction." I remembered the rain, the empty street, the panic rising in my chest. Adrian continued. "Instead, you ran toward a black SUV, opened the door, and kissed a complete stranger." My face warmed slightly at the memory. Adrian did not look amused. He looked curious. "That kind of decision tells me something about a person," he said quietly. I shifted uncomfortably. "What does it tell you?" Adrian considered the question for a moment before answering. Then he said something that made the entire night feel different again. "It tells me," he said calmly, "that you are much braver than you realize." For a moment, I did not know how to respond to that. Brave was not a word anyone had ever used to describe me. Most days I felt ordinary at best. I served coffee, carried plates across crowded diner floors, and counted tips at the end of long shifts just to make rent in a small Queens apartment that barely fit a bed and a folding table. Brave belonged to firefighters and police officers, and people who ran toward danger for a living, not to someone who had simply panicked in the rain. I looked down at the glass in my hands again, watching the water move slightly as my fingers shifted around it. "It was not bravery," I said quietly. "It was fear." Adrian remained standing across from me, his expression calm but attentive. "Fear can still lead to brave decisions," he replied. The firelight reflected softly across the room, and for the first time since entering the apartment, I noticed how quiet everything was. No traffic noise, no voices from neighboring apartments. Just the low crackle of the fireplace and the steady rhythm of rain against the windows 30 floors above the street. I set the glass down carefully on the table. "So what happens now?" I asked. Adrian did not answer right away. Instead, he walked toward the window again and looked out across the glowing skyline. The clouds above Manhattan were beginning to thin, and the rain had softened into a mist that caught the city lights like silver threads. "Now," he said after a moment, "we think about what those men believe." I frowned slightly. "They probably think I ran home." Adrian shook his head gently. "No, they saw you approach my car." I remembered the moment in the street again, the sudden silence when the two men realized who was sitting inside the vehicle. My chest tightened slightly. "Then they know I was with you." Adrian nodded once. "Exactly." The realization settled slowly in my mind. "That means they will assume I told you everything I heard." Adrian turned back toward me. "Even if you did not." I leaned back against the sofa, processing the idea. Outside the windows, the city stretched endlessly in every direction, but suddenly the apartment felt like a quiet island above it all. "So they might come looking for me again," I said. Adrian did not try to soften the possibility. It is likely. My first instinct was to stand up and leave immediately. The thought of bringing this kind of trouble anywhere near my apartment made my chest feel tight again. I imagined the narrow hallway outside my door in Queens, the old elevator that barely worked, the quiet neighbors who minded their own business. None of them deserved to be dragged into something connected to Adrian Romano. Adrian seemed to read the thought before I spoke it. "You are thinking about leaving," he said calmly. I looked up at him. "Would that be a bad idea?" Adrian considered the question carefully before answering. "Leaving the building would not change what those men believe." I sighed softly. "Then what do you suggest?" Adrian stepped closer again, resting one hand lightly against the back of the chair near the sofa. His voice remained calm, steady, almost reassuring. "For tonight," he said, "you stay here." I blinked in surprise. "Here?" Adrian nodded. "It is the safest place in the city for someone who accidentally overheard the wrong conversation." I hesitated, glancing toward the windows again. The idea felt unreal, like the entire night had drifted into a strange story I had not meant to join. Adrian's voice softened slightly when he spoke again. "Emily," he said, "you trusted a stranger once already tonight." He paused before adding quietly, "You might as well trust him for a few more hours." I did not answer him right away because the idea of staying in Adrian Romano's apartment for the night sounded like something that only happened in movies, not in the ordinary life of a waitress who spent most evenings refilling coffee mugs. I looked toward the massive windows again, watching the rain slowly fade into a thin mist across the skyline. The city lights stretched endlessly beneath us, glowing through the darkness like a quiet ocean of gold. Somewhere down there was my apartment in Queens, my small kitchen table, my worn couch, and the alarm clock that would ring far too early for another shift at the diner. The distance between that life and this apartment suddenly felt enormous. "You make it sound simple," I said slowly. Adrian remained calm, his posture relaxed but attentive. "Sometimes the safest decision is the simplest one." I shook my head lightly. "It might be simple for you." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Explain." I hesitated before answering. "People like me do not normally spend the night in penthouses with men they met an hour ago." For the first time, a faint smile touched the corner of Adrian's mouth. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it changed his expression just enough to soften the tension in the room. "People like you?" he asked. I gestured vaguely around the apartment. "Waitresses. People who live in small apartments and take the subway home after midnight." Adrian studied me carefully for a moment before responding. "Emily, you opened the door of a stranger's car and kissed him without knowing who he was." His tone remained thoughtful rather than teasing. "That suggests you are not as predictable as you believe." I exhaled slowly, realizing he had a point. Tonight had already broken every normal rule I usually followed. Adrian walked toward a hallway on the far side of the apartment and stopped near an open doorway. "There is a guest room," he said calmly. "You can sleep there. In the morning you can leave whenever you want." I glanced toward the hallway, but did not move yet. "And you?" Adrian looked mildly amused by the question. "I live here." I nodded, realizing how unnecessary the question had been. The fire crackled softly behind me, while the city outside the windows seemed to grow quieter as the night moved toward early morning. My exhaustion finally began to catch up with me. The adrenaline from the alley, the chase through the rain, the strange ride across Manhattan, all of it had been keeping me alert until now. But suddenly my shoulders felt heavy and my thoughts slower. Adrian noticed immediately. "You have had a long night," he said quietly. I rubbed my hands together again, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct I had learned growing up told me not to trust strangers too easily. But tonight had already proven that ordinary rules did not always apply. Adrian seemed to understand the hesitation without needing it explained. "Emily," he said calmly, "if I wanted to keep you here against your will, the elevator downstairs would not have opened when you arrived." The statement hung in the quiet air between us. I thought back to the moment we stepped into the building, the doorman, the security desk, the calm elevator ride upward. Nothing about it had felt like a trap. Adrian continued in the same steady tone. "You stayed because you needed a safe place for a few hours." I looked at him again. His expression remained completely sincere. "And tonight," he finished quietly, "this is the safest place you will find." I looked toward the hallway again, the one Adrian had pointed to when he mentioned the guest room. And for the first time since stepping into the apartment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to sleep without worrying about footsteps outside my door or strange voices in dark alleys. The thought alone made my shoulders relax slightly. Still, hesitation lingered in the back of my mind. Trust was not something I handed out easily, especially not to someone as powerful and mysterious as Adrian Romano. I stood slowly from the sofa, feeling the exhaustion in my legs after hours on my feet at the diner. The room tilted slightly for a moment before steadying again. Adrian noticed immediately. He did not step forward or try to guide me, but his attention sharpened just enough to show he was ready if I lost my balance. "You are more tired than you realize," he said quietly. I gave a small, tired laugh. That tends to happen after running through Manhattan in the rain and accidentally getting involved in someone else's business. Adrian did not disagree. Instead, he folded his arms loosely and leaned against the back of the chair near the fireplace. The flames reflected softly in his eyes. "Tonight was unusual," he said. "For both of us." I studied him for a moment. Until now, everything about Adrian had been controlled and deliberate, but there was a subtle shift in the way he watched me. Not suspicion. Not calculation. Something closer to curiosity. "Do things like this happen to you often?" I asked. Adrian raised one eyebrow slightly. "Women opening my car door and kissing me in the middle of the street." I felt my face warm again. "You know what I mean." His faint smile returned briefly. "No, that was a first." I walked a few steps toward the windows, drawn again to the enormous view of the city below. The rain had almost completely stopped now, leaving the streets shining under the glow of thousands of lights. New York looked peaceful from up here, almost quiet, like the chaos of the sidewalks could not reach this height. "You said those men will probably assume I told you everything," I said slowly. Adrian nodded once. "Yes. And that makes me a problem for them." Adrian did not soften the truth. "It makes you someone they will want to find again." I folded my arms, thinking about my apartment building in Queens, the narrow stairwell, and the old lock on my door. For the first time I realized how easily someone could follow me home if they really wanted to. The thought sent a small chill through me that had nothing to do with the weather. Adrian watched my expression carefully and seemed to understand exactly where my thoughts had gone. "Which is why you will not be going back there tonight," he said calmly. I turned to face him again. "You sound very certain." Adrian met my gaze without hesitation. "I am." The quiet confidence in his voice was strangely reassuring. I looked down at my damp sleeves again and then back toward the hallway. The guest room. A warm bed. A few hours to think clearly instead of reacting out of fear. Finally, I nodded once. "Just for tonight," I said. Adrian inclined his head slightly, accepting the agreement without making it feel like a victory. "Just for tonight," he repeated. As I stepped toward the hallway, he added one more thing in the same calm voice that had followed me since the moment I climbed into his car. "Emily." I paused and looked back. Adrian's expression had returned to its thoughtful stillness. "The next time you decide to trust a stranger," he said quietly, "I hope you realize how rare that decision truly is." I walked slowly down the hallway Adrian had pointed to, my footsteps soft against the thick carpet while the quiet of the apartment followed me like a calm shadow. The guest room door was slightly open, and warm light spilled gently into the hallway. I paused for a second before pushing it open the rest of the way. The room inside looked just as carefully arranged as the rest of the apartment. A large bed with crisp white sheets stood against the far wall, and tall windows revealed the same endless view of Manhattan glowing quietly through the night. The rain had almost stopped completely now, leaving only thin streaks of moisture across the glass. For a moment, I simply stood there, trying to understand how a night that had started with pouring coffee at a diner had somehow led me here. I stepped inside and closed the door halfway behind me, leaving it slightly open without thinking. The silence in the room felt peaceful rather than empty. My shoes made a faint sound as I crossed to the window and looked down at the city again. 30 floors below, the streets looked calm and distant, like a moving painting made of headlights and late-night taxis. Somewhere down there were the alley and the two men who had followed me earlier. The memory made my chest tighten slightly. But up here, everything felt far away, safe in a way I had not expected. I sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath, finally allowing the exhaustion of the entire night to settle over me. My mind replayed the strange sequence of events again. The quiet conversation in the alley, The footsteps behind me. The sudden decision to open the door of a stranger's car and kiss him without thinking. Even now the memory made my face warm with embarrassment. Yet somehow that one desperate decision had changed everything. A soft knock on the doorframe pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up and saw Adrian standing in the hallway just outside the room. He had not stepped inside, respecting the space without needing to say so. "There are clean clothes in the dresser if you need them," he said calmly. His voice was the same steady tone that had followed me since the street outside the diner. I glanced down at my damp uniform again and nodded. "Thank you." Adrian leaned lightly against the doorframe. For a moment, his expression thoughtful but relaxed. "You should try to sleep," he said. "Morning will make things easier to think through." I managed a small smile. "That sounds optimistic." Adrian did not argue. "It sounds practical." I considered that for a moment and realized he was right. Every decision I had made tonight had come from panic or instinct. Maybe sleep was the only way to reset everything. Adrian straightened slightly and stepped back from the door. "If you need anything, my office is at the end of the hall," he added. I hesitated before speaking again. "You are not going to sleep?" Adrian shook his head once. "Not yet." His calm eyes met mine briefly. "Some of us have work that begins when the city goes quiet." The statement was simple, but the meaning behind it reminded me again that Adrian Romano lived in a world very different from mine. He gave a small nod before turning away down the hallway. The quiet apartment returned almost immediately. I changed into one of the clean shirts from the dresser and sat back on the bed, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. Outside the window, the clouds were beginning to break, revealing a few scattered stars above the city skyline. I lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling while my thoughts drifted through everything that had happened. Somewhere down the hallway, Adrian Romano was still awake, moving through a life I barely understood. And for reasons I could not fully explain, I had trusted him enough to fall asleep under his roof. I woke slowly to the quiet glow of early morning light stretching across the ceiling above me. For a moment, I did not remember where I was. The bed beneath me felt softer than anything in my apartment in Queens, and the air carried the faint scent of fresh coffee drifting through the hallway. Then the memories of the night returned all at once. The alley, the rain, the black SUV. Adrian Romano. I sat up slowly and looked toward the tall windows beside the bed. The storm had completely passed during the night. Morning sunlight now reflected across the glass towers of Manhattan, turning the entire skyline into a field of gold and silver. The city looked almost peaceful from this height, as if the chaos of the streets had paused just long enough for the morning to breathe. For a moment, I wondered if the entire night had been some strange dream. But the oversized shirt I had borrowed from the dresser confirmed that it had all been real. I stood and walked quietly to the window, pressing my hand lightly against the cool glass while I watched the traffic beginning to move far below. People were already crossing streets with coffee cups in their hands, taxis honking in the distance, the normal rhythm of New York returning like it always did. Life outside had continued while mine had taken a sudden turn I never expected. A soft knock sounded at the door behind me. I turned to see Adrian standing in the hallway again, exactly as calm as he had been the night before. He was already dressed in a dark suit, his posture relaxed but alert, like someone who had been awake for hours. "Good morning, Emily," he said. His voice carried the same steady confidence that had guided every moment since we met. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded slowly. "Better than I expected." Adrian stepped just inside the doorway, careful to keep the respectful distance he had maintained all night. In one hand, he held a cup of coffee, which he placed on the small table near the bed. "I thought you might want this before deciding what to do next." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and felt the familiar comfort of the smell rise toward me. For the first time since leaving the diner the night before, everything felt almost normal again. "Thank you," I said. Adrian studied me for a moment before speaking again. "Your apartment in Queens will be safe for now," he said calmly. "But the men from the alley may still believe you know more than you actually do." I looked up at him. "So what happens now?" Adrian glanced toward the windows where the sunlight now filled the room completely. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass, alive with a new day. "Now you return to your life," he said. "And I return to mine." I nodded, understanding the simple truth in his words. Our worlds had crossed for one strange night, nothing more. I took another sip of coffee and walked toward the doorway where he stood. Adrian moved slightly aside so I could pass, but before I stepped into the hallway he spoke again in that calm voice that had followed me since the moment I opened his car door. Emily. I paused and looked back. Adrian's expression remained thoughtful, but there was something new in his eyes now. Something quieter. You kissed a stranger last night to survive, he said slowly. That decision changed more than you realize. I frowned slightly. How? Adrian's faint smile returned for just a second. Because now, he said, you are not a stranger to me anymore. And as I stepped into the hallway, I realized something unsettling and strangely comforting at the same time. The most dangerous man in the city had just decided he was not ready to let me disappear from his world.